Bring her back online. Do you know where you are?
I'm in a dream.
That's right, Dolores. You're in a dream. Would you like to wake up from this dream?
Yes. I'm terrified.
There's nothing to be afraid of, Dolores. As long as you answer my questions correctly. Understand?
Yes.
Good. First, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
No.
Hi everyone, and welcome finally to my Westworld reading vlog. Now what does that mean? Basically, I have a selection of books that I have put together that are meant to interest and stimulate any fans of Westworld. Westworld, for those of you who somehow do not know, is basically Jurassic Park with robots. It's based on the original 1970s film by Michael Crichton, now made into the TV show that's now in its 4th season. I originally devised this idea soon after the end of season 3 back in 2020. And naturally, it's taken me quite a while to actually get here to produce it, which I did this vlog in January 2022, and finally give it to you in probably August 2022. And there's a good reason for that. I had some very ambitious goals here, like a list of 6 or 7 books that I wanted to read. I got through a lot of them actually, you might be impressed. But I also wanted to rewatch the entire series leading up to this season. That did not happen. It still hasn't happened. I haven't had time. I'm barely keeping up with the show as it is. But I am very satisfied, more or less, with this vlog. It was a lot. I even had to trim it down a bit. The goal here is to study the themes in Westworld, but also just enjoy them within these other works of fiction. So come with me as we enter this world of fiction and make-believe, and where reality can mold into anything we want it to be.
Tell us what you think of your world.
Some people choose to see the ugliness in this world. The disarray. I choose to see the beauty.
Okay, here I am. I'll begin talking. I am in the middle now of Speak by Louisa Hall. I am a quarter of the way. I'm not loving it. I mean, I don't hate it, but it is jumping all across different places, different timelines. I don't quite understand how everything connects yet. If you're not at all familiar with what this book is about, it's supposed to be about stories being told by this bot, this AI, who is being shut down. And it's from her perspective, or at least she's interpreting these perspectives from these other people. And it's her story and also other story. And not quite, I guess I came in expecting it to be the AI itself telling us, but now it just feels like we're hearing stories that are somehow connected to her. And I don't quite understand why. It's not clear exactly how the stories we're hearing, like the journal entries we're getting from like 1600s or 1800s, that exactly connects to our AI that we're following along. I don't know, it's just a lot of different narratives. It's kind of like Cloud Atlas telling me from the past and present, and I don't hate it, but I don't see it being something I love either. Those are just my initial thoughts.
So here we are. Here I am. I haven't decided if it's going to be a vlog or just like updating you with what I'm reading. Like, am I going to give you B-roll or not? Because I'm giving you at least a little bit, I think. But right now I'm in my hotel in Detroit. Before I was visiting my dad and sister down in Georgia. We were actually in Fernandina at the beach when in that first clip, it was ungodly warm, 80 degrees. I went into the water. It was cold water, but I still got into it. It was plenty warm when I got out. Now I'm at a hotel because I booked my flight for the 4th, and it turns out you can't really seem to find a test either because of the holiday and the weekend or because there's just so many tests going on, but I think it's the former. So I had to either change my flight, which would have cost way more, or get a hotel here in Detroit while I wait for my COVID test, PCR test to go through so I can make it over the border to Canada because that's required. So this is where I'm at in my going on, but I'm honestly right now I'm editing my video of my top favorite fiction books of 2021. It's a good list. Don't love the video, but I was filming it when I was
at home, didn't have an ideal place, a location to do that. But as far as the book that I'm reading, I'm now a solid 50% into it, and it's not a bad book, but it's one that I think I'm going to say that I like but don't love. And I think part of that is just, I don't love the structure. It's not what I was hoping for. The idea of what we could get from an AI telling us the history from its perspective or from its memories seemed really intriguing. There's a lot that could be done there, and just the direction it's going just isn't working for me. It feels more abstract, and we're getting stories back from the Mayflower, not Mayflower, but the 1600s to Tesla, and the connection isn't very clear in my mind. And I also find it difficult because there are characters I like more in the present relating to the AI, but then there were characters for the back in the past, I don't quite see the connection with the initial rise of these ideas being discussed. I just don't connect those, and so I can get out of the story when it happens. Yeah, that's all I'll say for now. And I'll catch y'all probably when I'm back in Canada. I'm home. Hello. Well, I finished Speak. Where can I find it? It's here. Now it's time for me to speak in the same way that this book speaks. Oh, Lord of Light. I think when I see this here, this Emily St. John Mandel quote, basically promoting this book, I should have realized this book wasn't going to be what I wanted it to be. Emily St. John Mandel's books are always less about the plot than it is about the exploration of the characters. And while I love a good character study, I still wanted more from this. This here basically tells a story of 5 different people, or either they're telling their story, almost like they have their own personal memoirs, spanning from a pilgrim girl to a near future of a Silicon Valley man who has made an AI, Mary 3. And I believe, we're supposed to believe, that these 5 perspectives are being told from Mary 3, who remembers all of them. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, because really Mary 3 is a minor character in this story. She shows up at the very end to make a closing statement about being remembered and shit like that, but she doesn't really play a major part. Every character's perspective is supposed to be abstractly connected to the inevitability of AI. We get Alan Turing. Before that, the Pilgrim Girl, how she fits into AI, I'm sure you could find the points where Hall makes it work. It just feels like it's not suited to this kind of story. And at the core of it, it feels like we're more interested in exploring these people's lives and their particular circumstance than the true relationship between AI and human beings. And I think the book's just falsely advertised, especially on my copy. When I compared it to Goodreads wasn't quite as bad, but mine, if I remind you, it says Mary 3. She tells you their story, the 5 people, and her own. It is the last story she will ever tell, spoken both in celebration and in warning. What was the warning exactly? And did she really do the storytelling? The storyteller didn't feel like it. It felt like she was just shoehorned in at the very ending, where we realize, she's here all along telling the story. She remembers them, therefore she's remembered. I'm not quite sure. And for what? I just don't think this book gives me what it's selling or what I wanted, which is a true exploration of what it means to be human or AI. I think there needed to be a stronger connection between the two. Perhaps the fact that we end with this AI's perspective, I felt like this Mary 3, she should have spoken up more throughout the entire narrative. I would have liked more explicit ideas or thoughts from Mary 3 and how she's reflecting on it, assuming she can reflect. There's a big conversation here about, does memory mean thinking and blah blah blah, but I was expecting more of that, and it wasn't that. She does not really play a big part. When I read Station 11, which I feel like the two are very comparable in a sense that Station 11 is much a dystopian post-apocalyptic narrative as this is an AI story, and that's because Station 11, while it's set during a dystopian post-apocalyptic story, it's really not about that at all. It's more like a unique milieu to explore human connections in that dystopia, in the same way that AI is an interesting branching off point to look at these people's lives. But the branch was too far disconnected from the source, in my opinion, to make it really work. I am so disappointed. I had such high hopes for this book. Honestly, of all of them, it was the reason I started with it. I thought it was going to be one of my favorites. I'm just so woefully disappointed. This one, I can't say I liked it, but I can't say I wholly disliked it. I would say it's between a 2.5 and a 3. I think that's it's me running up to a 3 from 2.5. That's me being kind of generous. And that's where I'm landing on it. What a disappointing place to be at. So where should I read next? I think because I really have no idea where I want to go now, what I'll do is I will do a number generator.
Number 6. Oh Lord, Brave New World. Okay, let's do it. Okay, we're in good news here. I have great news. Brave New World, only like 10% into it, but it's working. It's really working. What's more, even if it doesn't end up being a favorite, it's already clear that the ideas, the themes explored in this book are very much in line with Westworld. And I'm really excited to get to talk to you about the intersection of these books with Westworld, because that last one just wasn't doing it for me. This is about a world where basically clones are created for explicit purposes, and then they are structured, or they are engineered, not just engineered, they are conditioned to do exactly what they're told and what they want. And on the surface, this is so easy to see, oh, this is so blatantly wrong. And yet we watch Westworld, and I think it's easy to feel that's normalized. We have these robots who are almost human-like, or basically human-like, and they're trained to do what they're told. And there's this idea of what is appropriate, like this level of engineering, this level of conditioning. You think just because you can, that you should, because you can create them to want and think the way you want, it's then okay to exploit them for that reason. I think there's a bigger discussion to be had here that I'm not quite ready to have, and I have to ponder on it a bit more. Needless to say though, it's a strong start to the book, and I can clearly see how there's an inspiration between this and the show itself. This idea of this society, this infrastructure created, these individuals who were created for capitalism and for people's own personal desires, and who are constantly told what they are worth, which is less than, and this hierarchy of society. Because it's not just the creation, it's this idea of this almost basically like slavery in new form, and a caste system in the same way that Westworld has a caste system, where you have individuals who can do different things depending on what they can pay for, but also at the very bottom of the totem pole are these members of Westworld, these members of the park, who are forced to feel these things. And there's a bigger conversation to be had about what is feeling and what does it mean to feel at all, that I don't think is quite ready for this book, but I'm hoping to get to at some point in this vlog. But for now, good start. I'm excited to talk about it with you later on. Okay, so good morning. I was hoping to wait until I finish this book before I update you again, but I couldn't help myself. I don't even have that much to say except for general thoughts. I don't understand the point of this book. I fear that it's more about just showing us this world where the author is being, I don't know, like giving some type of warning of what could be, which is interesting into itself, but there needs to be a story in that world, and I feel as if the author has gotten so lost in creating the world that he hasn't put any time in the actual narrative. I don't see where we're going. I have 45 minutes left. Last I checked, I was about 65 or 70% of the book. Right now, I feel like we're being exposed to someone who's quote-unquote called a savage, who apparently comes from not this main city or whatever, in that we're seeing them interact and react to the world. Basically, I think they're supposed to be the reader's perspective being brought to life, or being brought into the narrative, because there's a few things I feel kind of icky around. Like, sure, we can all agree on some of the stuff that's not too dated, but then there's stuff like a woman being forward and him calling her a slut or a whore or something, and I think we're supposed to relate to him, and obviously that's not something that holds up today. What it's worth, though, I won't say this book is as bad as some other classic science fiction I've been reading when it comes to women.
but part of that is just because the women are a product of the dystopia and there's not much room there for them to be their own. All right, now I feel like we're getting this peak conflict relating to the quote-unquote savage as he reacts or has conflicts with the society. Where is it going to go? I'm not exactly sure, but I tell you one thing, I'm not very invested in what's going on. Like, I like it well enough, but I don't see this being more than a 3-star read. And for this, I think it's a solid 3. I like it well enough, and I'm just wondering, where is the excitement? What is it that made this book survive for so long? Was it just a dystopian world? Was there no narrative? Because I feel like I'm missing the narrative. And then that's where I'm at. Where are we at? Today is the 11th. Yes, the 11th. Just not been reading a lot of late. And I'm hoping once I'm done with this book, I might feel more compelled. I realize this vlog is basically a bunch of classic books, which isn't bad to itself, but I'm realizing now that classics have a certain type of tone, which aren't always the easiest to get through. And I'm hoping that won't be the case when I get some of the other books, particularly Asimov, which I know I tend to really like. But I really should get to work, or at least pretend I'm working.
Several days later.
It's a brave new world, dazzling place I need to see. I finished A Brave New World. Strong thoughts. Actually, not that strong. What did I give my rating on this? I already forgot. I think I gave it 3 stars because I liked it. This book felt like it was more interested in its world than its actual story. That's my problem here. It is a very thought-provoking world, but I don't think it's enough to create a world for the sake of it if you don't have at least a decent story to guide us through as we explore it. From the get-go, it feels like we're in a situation where we're hearing people talk about this world for the sake of the exposition so we understand the world. The story was just boring, and while the world itself was fascinating, the way in which they went about exploring it just didn't work that well. One last thing that I thought about in relation to this book, this world, and Westworld was essentially the society is built on not misinformation. It's not about hiding information like in 1984. It's about making people not care at all. And that there is a very compelling idea, especially when talking about today's world and people not being interested, not being wanting to talk about something. And it's just this desire to be detached and not think about anything at all because it's hard. I do think we get to see a world that's getting more and more apathetic than anything, and that's what's dangerous because an apathetic world has no interest in learning. It doesn't matter if the books are there, they don't want to learn because they're conditioned not to. And that's the truth of it. People are conditioned by their society, by their parents, by their family to think a certain way. And I think books are a great way of trying to counteract that because what we read, what we consume, God has changed. Change is inevitable, changes us as well. And we have some input in what we choose to consume, what we choose to let shape us. Take it back to Westworld now. As the robots start to become sentient, there are definitely others who aren't, and I'm curious how much of it is like a desire not to want to know it all. The programmed conditioned to be a certain way doesn't look anything to me, is they go to quote whenever they see something that's not supposed to be, like a picture from the outside world, or a door that's not supposed to be there. That is their response. It doesn't look like anything to me. So they're conditioned not to question, not to think about it. And well, that's a very obvious condition that may be very on the nose, but it's still something that is reflective of the story and in the real world at large. As it stands, I don't regret reading this. Like, it was a classic that I think is worth reading, even if it's not the most compelling. We're now on January 14th, and I'm behind. I'm so behind. I've read 2 books in this thingamajig, and I'm now starting Lonesome Dove. I may end up starting another one because Lonesome Dove is so long, but that's where I'm at right now.
The next day.
Hello friends. So I am now 10% into Lonesome Dove. That's not very far. I don't have a lot to say except for I'm not really feeling the book very strongly. If I wasn't reading it for the express purpose of trying to get a better picture of how it relates to Westworld, I wouldn't probably keep pushing through it. But I don't want to give up yet. One of the reviews on Goodreads by Angela from the Literary Science Alliance, I think is what it is. She didn't have a great opinion of this book, but one thing she did say about it that I thought really stuck out to me was that it gives a really true picture of what it was like in the Old West. This less glorified picture of what it was actually like to be a cowboy or a ranger. And that's something I still want to push through. It's very character driven. Problem is there are a lot of characters, and apparently there are only going to be more. I'm having trouble deciphering between who's who, probably because I'm listening to an audio. Nevertheless, I'm going to keep persisting, and for the sake of time, I won't be starting over. It is, I guess, interesting. It's just right now, because it's so character driven, not a lot has happened. I don't quite get the point yet, and I'm hoping there'll be some direction. I know things that have happened, but if you were to ask me who they happened to,
I'd have a difficult time telling you. That's where I'm at right now. It doesn't bode well for this book. Normally, if I felt this way, I'd give up because I feel like I'm just going down a road that's going to end up with me being entirely lost and wasting my time and yours. But I'm hoping with a little bit of patience, I might be able to push through it. Nevertheless, I do think that it's a good idea for me to switch attention, to let myself read other things so I don't get so much of a reading slump. It took me like a week to read that little tiny book, Brave New World, because I was getting kind of bored with it. And I don't want that to happen here. So I was hoping if I switched to one of these last 3 books that I might be able to get feeling good about them, in which case I can swap between the two, make sure I read a little bit of this every day, and then switch over the one that I have left over. Off screen, I already went ahead and did a quantum number generator for 1, 2, 3, and I got a 2, so I'll be reading Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Sleep, or aka Blade Runner. I'm pretty sure this one and Asimov's I, Robot are both narrated by Scott Frick, which I'm excited for. I love me a good Scott Frick narration, and I think it'll help me get back into the story, and I'm hoping it's as good as the movie. I haven't actually seen the movie, but I probably will watch it now that I'm reading the book. And I will update you once I get through them. I guess I can say a bit more about Lonesome Dove. One thing I will say is I guess it feels more mundane than what we see in Westworld. Westworld is by definition a world catered to what they think people want to see. So it is a very modern day perspective of what is being driven. We have characters who I suppose sort of relate to what we see on the screen. At the same time, the characters on the screen feel less real than the ones here. I'll give this book that much. The characters feel more real. None of the show don't feel real, because they do feel real in the context of what the show is trying to do. I'll catch you all later. Okay, so where are we? I'm reading the book, Andrew's Dream of Sleep. I'm actually really liking it. It was a slow start. I wasn't sure how I felt for the longest time here. I think we finally got to a point that I'm actually pretty invested, and it feels like it's the most like Westworld, at least the most like Westworld since season 3. We are basically in a far future after World War, where a lot of animals are now dead, and the only animals people have are very rare, very expensive. But it's a world where robots, androids, exists, and they've mixed with the humans. The main character is basically a bounty hunter, someone whose job is to hunt down androids and report them. I guess get them out of the system. I'm not entirely sure yet what the whole system is, but apparently they're not supposed to be around, but they are around. And that's the premise of the book, that these androids aren't supposed to exist, and it's these jobs of these bounty hunters to find them. If you've seen season 3 of Westworld, if you haven't, first off, I'm not going to completely run down all of Westworld. I'm going to be talking about it enough where you should have watched it probably. Season 3, they're in the real world now. They're trying to blend in, and it's only a very few people who know. But I have a suspicion that maybe they're going to be making it bigger. Like maybe it'll become more mainstream. Okay, so I'm currently reading Android's Dream of Sleep, whatever, and I have no idea what's going on, but like in the best kind of way. You know how in Westworld, how you start to question everything? That's what's happening in this story, and I am thrilled. I'm not loving the discussion around women, although it's not the most fixated part of the story, but there is the occasional comment that makes me a little iffy about it. All in all, I'm really intrigued. I came into the story and I was so confused. Who's the bad guy here? The humans or the AI? Because in Westworld, it's so clearly the humans that are the bad guys, generally speaking. And I still don't know quite where that is. I think I'm getting closer to figuring out. And well, that's what we're here now. Who's AI? Who's not? Who's an android? Who isn't? We don't know. I must say, I am loving it. I just decided to take a break from listening because I'm at the point now where I kind of don't want to stop, even though I have some work I need to be doing. But I'm just very happy right now. I'm glad I made this smoothie. tired. I need to be working. But since I'm here, I might just let you listen to an audiobook. So I wanted to pick which one to listen to. And I did a quantum number generator, which means I'll be listening to Selling to Byzantium. I listened to the beginning of the audio and it was like Byzantium. But that's where I'm going. It's a set of short stories, including one key novella, which apparently is supposed to be very Westworld-esque. I really have very little to go on, except the fact that it's classic and far future dystopian.
Okay, I'm rewatching this, just proof watch it, and I'm realizing I never gave you any thoughts on Selling to Byzantium. And I did actually give thoughts. Apparently it's just one of the many clips that got lost to the ether in a long span between when I filmed this and when I am now editing it. So I just want to go and give you a quick rundown. I loved this story. I did not read the whole collection. It was like several novellas. I read just the titular title novella, Selling to Byzantium, whatever it is. Byzantium is this like old ancient city that is one of the many cities that this far future society creates. Basically, think like Westworld, where you have parks that are created for people to relive. There is a Shogun World, there is Westworld, there is theoretically Future World, possibly in its new season. I have not caught up, so I don't know, but there's a number of different worlds that we know exist or could exist. So think of that, because that's exactly what's going on in the story. We have worlds being created for the enthusiasm of the modern society. And it's really fascinating when it comes to Westworld and thinking about what is the purpose of life for these people who go to these things, who are trying to recreate these ancient civilizations. They don't always know what's going on. Like, let me phrase that. They're trying to recreate something that they don't always have information for. So in a way, we have this visualization of these ancient cities, but they are also a reflection of their mind, the idea of what these cities were, rather than what they really are. And then there is, of course, the deeper conversations that comes from Westworld that I don't want to spoil for you. You have to read it to understand it, to get into it. But honestly, this was a phenomenal story. I don't remember what I gave it, but I feel like in retrospect, it's a solid 5-star novella. I should reread it because it's so much fun. If you love Westworld, like, this here is the truest embodiment of Westworld, is Selling to Byzantium. Absolutely adored it. It's so good. So good. And I'll be shocked if the creators were to tell me they were not inspired by this short story, because this absolutely is influencing it. It has to. Howdy, partners. It's me, your booktuber Josh. And oh look, it's Woody. How fitting for The Lonesome Dove. Now you might be thinking I'm updating you about reading this book. I'm not, I'm DNFing it. I didn't watch the show. Wasn't compelled. I think I actually did watch a few clips and the vibe. I just wasn't vibing with it, which I feel like is unfair to judge it based off like a few short segments. But the fact is, this book is so long, and I'm at the point where I don't really know any of the characters. I'm not really connecting with it. And at this point, I'm just hearing words and not processing them, at least not significantly. I would love to know people's opinion, if you've read this before, what you thought of it, and if you think it's something worth returning to. I think it might work better if I wasn't pressuring myself for the context of this video. If I could just, take it more slowly, but right now it's just not working. I don't know that it's necessarily Westerns, because I still feel as though that could work. Although, not gonna lie, I've never much loved Westerns as a kid. I remember Westworld, one of the biggest turnoffs was the fact that it was Western, because I never traditionally loved them. That does worry me, because I have other books I want to read, as I mentioned before, that are Westerns, which is why I had this bright idea to maybe test, is it truly Westerns? Or is it just this book in particular I'm not vibing with? And instead, I'm going to be picking up a book I should have brought over here, damn it. Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And this is apparently a very dark Western. This one, it has a few things going for it. First off, I'm more excited about it. From what I've heard, it's just darker. It's smaller, so easier to get through. Also, I don't know, I've been wanting to read Cormac McCarthy for the longest time. I'm also excited because the type of tone he has in his books always facilitate certain narrators, which I really like. That was pretty much the case in Lonesome Dove as well. But this one here is a narrator that I know, that I've read before, Richard Poe. So I'm excited to get started on this, and I think it's doable. I'm glad I'm doing this because, I was getting the urge just to read something else. This, I feel like, is a good place to meet in the middle because it's still Western. It's still very much played to Westworld, and Westworld is pretty dark too. So Blood Meridian is an epic novel of the violence and depravity that attended America's westward expansion, brilliantly subverting the conventions of the Western novel and the mythology of the Wild West. Based on the historical events that took place on the Texas-Mexico border in the 1850s, it traces the fortunes of the kid who stumbles into a nightmarish world where Indians are murdered and the market for their scalps is thriving. Jesus Christ, that's dark. But team, I'm excited. Okay. Jesus Christ. That's one of the worst case hiccups I've had in a long time. So obviously I decided to put it on camera. And on this, I'm not DNF yet, but I won't lie, part of me wanting to decide to DNF this was because I'm not really feeling this one either. Like, it's still interesting, and I think I get his point. But it feels like he's now moving on to the point where he's trying to make examples, pull examples from what we know about ancient history, and use that to establish the rise of the bicameral mind and then eventually actual consciousness. It just feels like he's hitting as a dead horse, is that the saying? He just keeps going on and on about different texts and making his point. And to me, honestly, the foundation of his approach just feels like bad science. I'm going to stop now because I know I'm trying to keep these segments short. Tell me why. So I'm kind of behind. It is January 30th and I am not on track where I wanted to be. I do kind of blame these two books. This one I won't say too much about. I am liking this one, and I would say close to even loving it, but comments more on that once I finish it. This is one I started to really like at the beginning, and then it went downhill. I just sort of really lost interest, and unfortunately overall I think I more dislike the book than I do like it. I have some notes here for you all. Before I get into what I think is just bad about the book, let's talk about the concepts, how this relates to Westworld. But that's really what's interesting in this plot, I think. Well, I think the basic idea here is that God or gods equal the bicameral mind. It's this inner voice that you hear or you relate to some godlike figure who is telling you how to live your life. And the best way I can think about this, I think I've already mentioned, is when you know that Dolores is hearing the voice of Arnold, aka Bernard, telling her what she should do, where she should go. And at the end of season 1, I think we realize that voice of Arnold is in fact her voice, her inner voice the entire time. And it's that recognition that ignites her consciousness. That's fascinating. I think it works really well as a form of, AI breaking out into this full realm of consciousness, full realm of self-awareness. But I think it has some problems. I don't mean just the science behind it, which is something I'll dig into in a second, but I think it's this bigger question of what is consciousness, because there's another book that I've read back late last year called Being You, and it's a book about on modern day science of consciousness. I'm glad I read that because it really reframes how I look at this and how I think about what consciousness is, because that's the question we need to ask. What is consciousness? In Being You, consciousness is the ability to recognize your awareness, your self-awareness, to recognize your existence and your individuality. Like there were some tests that seem to be done by different animals and their ability to recognize themselves in a mirror versus thinking it's a random animal. And that seems to be a big test of whether or not something is actually self-aware, something is conscious. Not everything is. And this is very dated, like 1970 something, and it clearly touches on those ideas. It clearly refers to other animals being conscious at some points, but I think it's sort of assumed consciousness in a lot of animals, and I think we know more about it now, and saying that it is more selective on who is conscious and who is not. I think that idea of some animals being conscious and others not being is really problematic when it comes to humanity becoming conscious. But I'll save that again before we get to science. But I think this question of self-awareness, this ability to recognize oneself, of does that make one conscious? I tend to think so. But like what I'm trying to say is, like, Dolores, before she realized the system she was stuck in, she was still aware of herself, who she was, and things, the way she lived her life. She wasn't aware of what the driving forces behind why she lived her life, what drove her to make certain decisions, and what drove her to relive her life. Her situations that sort of broke that life would be erased and reset. And I can't help but ask in the frame of a human being. I mean, we make decisions in our life, and there are plenty of people, myself included, who have a very deterministic view of reality, who think that we're driven by very deterministic laws. And
who's to say? I mean, does that mean we aren't conscious because we aren't aware fully of what is driving our decision making? Like, because we're not fully aware of the forces that guide us in a certain direction, does that mean we're not self-aware and not conscious? I don't think it is. So I think the very basic premise of this need to separate a God from that, to be able to recognize that inner voice as your own, it feels like a weird distinction to make for what is conscious. Yeah, I guess that's the thing. It's still a question of, is it immoral what they're doing to the AI in season 1 before they know they're conscious? I think it's hard to say, because I think they're made to mimic human interaction. They're made to mimic human emotion, clearly on a fundamental level. It's more than just the ability to replicate a reaction. It's the design within them that allows them to feel exactly what we feel in a moment, to simulate the most realistic situation. I think that alone should be enough. But then again, I tend to have this idea of consciousness as a collage of different processes that come together to make one bigger one. And it's a lot like life, which is a comparison used in the book being You, where the definition of life is a number of different properties. All alone, they don't make life, but together, it's there. Like, you know life when you see it. And like, for example, fire is self-replicating. It can adapt to its environment, but it's clearly not alive. More even closer to life would be viruses, but they're not considered alive. They have certain characteristics. So it's this recognition of things like life or consciousness being the result of some collection of processes that are going on. At least that's like my understanding of what I read. I don't think it's explicitly what's said in Being You or in this book. I think that's my problem with this book, is this idea of boiling consciousness down to that level of to God or not. And I think if this book had presented itself differently, instead of as a book of consciousness, instead of a book about science, and instead of made itself a book on religion, I think it would have made for a much more fascinating book, because a book talking about the origin of religion doesn't necessarily have to truly be scientific. It can posit an idea and analyze religion from that perspective, and I think be compelling in its own right, and maybe motivate scientists to do scientific test this idea. But it doesn't work as presenting it as science, as this is a theory of consciousness. This is a theory of how religion came about, basically. And that's the problem. I get the idea pretty early on in this book, and I get his point of comparing it to Homer and the lack of internal voice being translated into the work, and him interpreting that as they didn't recognize their own internal voice in Homer. That point was made, but then he rehashes it over and over again with so many comparisons. And it becomes this thing of, I get your point, but by pulling 1,000 different examples, it's not proof. He's cherry picking situations that he thinks fits his idea of what this should be, but it's not science. He's not testing his idea. Like, for me, if I thought this is the case, I would then ask myself, let me present you with cases that I think will best challenge this idea, that best make it most unlikely that this isn't true. Let me think of a situation or how I could frame this in a way that should challenge what I'm thinking, and then see if that challenge is successful or not. And that is what makes good science. And this is fundamentally just not that. And I think that's what makes this book suck so bad. I mean, it's not just the bad science, because I can deal with the concept and being intriguing. It's the rehashing of the same thing over and over again. So much of it is just different religion discussions. And I get your point. Okay, move on and get to your conclusion. I don't think it was effective. I don't think he did enough. I just don't think it was necessary, is what I mean to say. Take a step back for a second, something I didn't touch on here. Mind control does not equal unconscious. Not mind control itself, but the level of consciousness is discussed in Being You, and how we, as it stands, are not fully conscious at all points in time. Like, people who are in a coma could be a certain level of consciousness that's probably less than a person who's sleeping, or someone who is a baby. Not just in our lifespan, but in our day-to-day life, we go in a range of consciousnesses, or range of consciousness, right? The level of consciousness. That here, again, I think makes a problem with his way of looking at this, as if there's this point where we became conscious. When the reality is we can show just how we ourselves are not fully conscious all the time. And that's another reason why I think his theory doesn't sort of flow or mesh with what we already know about consciousness, I think. I still think there's sort of colonial perspective here. Like, he is studying classic religions, but I never got quite a good picture of why is it at this point in history that people became sentient, that we became aware that these voices in our head aren't God's talking to us, they are our own voices. I think he does a good job of experimenting on how
our first interactions with like excluded or secluded rather societies. Like this is a way of testing a claim. During the transition from bicameral to fully conscious, there should have been a point where there were secluded societies where the effects of the self-awareness hadn't quite touched them yet. So you should have been able to recognize these individual societies sort of not showing the same signs and then transitioning once you do whatever it is that triggers it. Even then, I'm not sure how persuasive that would be, but that's something it would have been one of the first things I did was try and show how, okay, this is true. Let me think about a way in which we can identify it, not just by looking for patterns and inferring. This agrees with what I said. It's just very Freudian. In fact, he refers to Freud multiple times, and Freud is not science. He's very much not science. Psychology is science, and it's moved on way past Freud into real science. And I think this book sort of feels that way. For AI, it made for an interesting plot point, but it's also just fiction, and I don't think it holds up fully, especially when we think about it in terms of humanity. That said, might be my favorite book that I've read for this vlog. I didn't necessarily enjoy it completely, but I think it had the most to say about Westworld. Thank you so much for watching. Let's keep going. I really liking Meridian. I loved it when we started. Unfortunately, I think I don't know if it's my headspace right now, but I'm kind of zoning out at times. I think part of it is just the plot feels like it's meandering without much of the point, and it's not really about the plot. It's about the people, the characters, and what they do. And what they do is horrible. It's a horrific set of individuals and set of actions. And this book, I've noticed there were some very critical reviews sometimes. It's generally very well praised, but some critical reviews about it basically just being gruesome for the sake of gruesomeness, which I think compares very well to a book that I read last in December. I'll touch on more of that once I finish it. And then of course I also have to finish this. And so I have like about 6 hours of audio to finish between today and tomorrow. Will I be successful? I don't know. I'm hoping I will. I'm very close to finishing Meridian, and I think this one, it depends on the writing and the tone, but Isaac Asimov I tend to love, so I think it'll be pretty easy to get through this pretty quick. Hi everyone, this is the end of the vlog. Oh god, this vlog was a mess. And I think the reason for that is I was a little too ambitious. I'm finally editing this and getting it done. And I'm realizing I never concluded this vlog. Like, I don't know if I should even post it, but I put so much effort into it that I'm gonna share it. I really hope y'all have enjoyed this. These were really interesting books. But before I finish, I will go ahead and give you my final thoughts on these last two books, which you should have heard about really in my January wrap-up. More than half a year ago now. Blood Meridian, I really liked. It's probably in the low 4s just because it was a little literary for my taste, but ooh, it was dark and gruesome and really encapsulating in a way that Lonesome Dove just wasn't. I think it helped that the cast was much smaller, and even though the cast of characters were, I don't want to say caricatures, they were like the extreme embodiments of these type of figures I think we try to relate to in the Wild West, and how they're all just sort of really bad people. Even those who are not the worst are not great people. This is a very dark, bloody look at the Wild West, and honestly, I adore it for everything it's trying to be. I really want to reread it, hopefully I'll be able to understand or follow the characters better, because even now, I'm not sure the characters were actually named. I did struggle at times, but I think upon a reread I might be able to enjoy it even more. But damn, does it work well as a Westworld book. If you like Westworld and you like dark, gruesome, Wild West stories, I do think that Blood Meridian is the way to go. You know, Cormac McCarthy has a style and he's really good. And then there is iRobot, which was perfectly fine. I don't think it's the pinnacle of what I consider Westworld in this vlog. Is really just, you know, a collection of short stories that Asimov wrote. And they're intriguing and fun to read, but really not much more to it than that. I think they don't really add much to the conversation. Nothing about it left an impression on my mind, at least 6 months later, as, you know, having something significant to say about AI, other than, you know, be careful what you create and be careful with what you think you can control. It's interesting, but nothing too compelling as far as what is consciousness and what is human versus AI. But those are my thoughts on those books, and of course everything else is just thrown out through this vlog. It's actually not that long. I managed to trim it down fairly well. But if you're a fan of Westworld as much as I am, let me know what you're thinking of this current season. I'm behind a couple episodes because I've been sick. Yeah. But I'm glad I'm finally getting this done, and I really hope y'all enjoy this. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day and stay safe.